My mother suddenly called. "Where are you now?" I was at my wife's parents' house for my wife's birthday party. At the house, the whole family is here. I said, "Listen, take your son and get out now." I asked why. She replied, "Just do it now. Don't ask questions." Her voice was unlike anything I'd heard before. I grabbed my son and ran out of the house. What happened next was shocking. Look, I've been to enough birthday parties to know the exact moment when things shift from politely boring to someone's about to discover their spouse is embezzling from the PDA. This wasn't supposed to be that kind of night. This was supposed to be cake, champagne that cost more than my truck payment, and me doing my best impression of a guy who genuinely cared about whether Olivia's father's golf handicap had improved since last quarter. Spoiler alert, it hadn't, and I'd been nodding along like a dashboard bobblehead for the better part of 45 minutes. The living room smelled like someone had carpet-bombed a department store perfume counter and then followed it up with an airstrike of those fancy little appetizers that come on toothpicks and taste like regret wrapped in prosciutto. Olivia's parents had gone all out for her 32nd birthday, which was weird because when I turned 32, she bought me socks and told me we needed to be more practical about celebrations. But here we were, surrounded by people in blazers that cost what I made in a month, and I was doing my supportive husband routine like I was auditioning for a Hallmark movie about a guy who married way above his tax bracket. Olivia looked stunning, naturally. She always did at these things. Hair perfect, dress that probably had a French name I couldn't pronounce, smile that could sell timeshares to people who already owned 3. She was working the room like a politician at a fundraiser, touching elbows, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, being the kind of charming that makes you wonder if maybe you're the problem for not finding suburban small talk absolutely riveting. I stood there with my whiskey. Well, their whiskey, the kind that comes in a bottle that looks like it should be in a museum, and tried to remember why I'd agreed to drive an hour and 20 minutes for this. Then my phone buzzed. Not the polite little vibration that says, "Hey, someone texted you about fantasy football," but the insistent, angry buzz that means someone's calling and they're not planning to leave a voicemail if you ignore them. I pulled it out of my pocket, fully expecting it to be my business partner Derek asking where I'd left the invoice templates or something equally thrilling. Instead, the screen read, "Gloria, my mother," and that's when my internal alarm system went from yellow to something approaching burnt orange. My mother doesn't call during social events. She's got this uncanny ability to know when I'm busy, and she respects it with the kind of military precision you'd expect from someone who raised 3 boys while working 2 jobs and somehow still found time to make homemade pierogies every Sunday. When Gloria calls during what she knows is fancy people time, as she calls it, something's gone catastrophically sideways. I stepped away from the cluster of middle-aged men discussing market volatility like it was their favorite sport and answered, "Hey, Mom, kind of in the middle of. Where are you right now?" Her voice cut through my sentence like a chainsaw through birthday cake. No preamble. No, "Hi, honey, how's the party?" Just that question, delivered in a tone I hadn't heard since I was 16, and she'd caught me trying to sneak back in through my bedroom window at 3 in the morning. "I'm at Olivia's parents' house," I said, suddenly very aware that my voice sounded defensive even though I had nothing to be defensive about. "The birthday thing. Remember? I told you about it last week. Take Lucas and get out. Now. Don't ask." And then she hung up. Just like that. No explanation. No, "I'll call you back." No, "Sorry for being cryptic, but I have a good reason." Just a directive that sounded less like motherly advice and more like an evacuation order from someone who'd just spotted a tornado on the horizon. I stood there for about 3 seconds, phone still pressed to my ear even though the call had ended, trying to process what had just happened. Around me, the party continued its polite drone. Someone laughed too loudly at something that wasn't that funny. Ice clinked in glasses. Olivia's mother was holding court near the fireplace, gesturing with her wine glass in a way that suggested she was either conducting an invisible orchestra or explaining a very complicated conspiracy theory. My son Lucas was across the room, 7 years old and sticky with frosting, sitting cross-legged on the floor next to Olivia's nephew, both of them deeply invested in some kind of action figure battle that involved a lot of sound effects, and what I hoped was an actual spit being launched at the toys. He had that look on his face, the one where he's so absorbed in his imaginary world that you could probably set off a car alarm next to him and he wouldn't notice. When your mother sounds like a 5-alarm fire, You don't argue. You don't ask for clarification. You don't stand there like an idiot trying to figure out if she's being dramatic. Gloria doesn't do dramatic. Gloria does practical, efficient, and occasionally terrifying when the situation calls for it. If she was telling me to grab my kid and bail on a party thrown by people who probably spent more on flowers than I'd spent on my wedding, then something was very, very wrong. I crossed the room in about 6 steps, weaving between clusters of people who were too polite to tell me I was moving like my hair was on fire. "Lucas, buddy, we gotta go," I said, reaching down and scooping him up in one motion. He made a noise of protest, clutching his action figure like I'd just announced we were leaving Disney World 5 minutes into the trip. "But Papa Bear, we didn't even have cake yet," he whined. And yeah, that nickname was going to haunt me until he turned 13 and decided I was terminally uncool, but right now I didn't care. "We'll get cake at home. Better cake. Cake that doesn't taste like someone's mortgage payment," I said, which made 0 sense to him, but made me feel slightly better about ruining his evening. Olivia materialized next to me like she'd been teleported, her perfect hostess smile flickering with confusion. "What's going on? Where are you going?" "Family emergency," I said, which was technically true even if I had no idea what the emergency actually was. "My mom called. We need to go. Now." Her eyes did that thing. That quick calculation thing where I could practically see her running through scenarios and deciding which version of concerned wife to deploy. She landed on mildly annoyed but understanding, which was her go-to for situations where making a scene would be worse than just letting things happen. "Is everything okay? Is Gloria all right?" "I don't know yet. I'll call you when I know more," I said, already moving toward the door with Lucas tucked under one arm like a football made of Spider-Man t-shirt and birthday cake crumbs. I left a trail of polite gasps and confused looks behind me. Someone, I think it was Olivia's father, called out something about hoping everything's all right, but I was already out the door, across the perfectly manicured lawn that probably required a degree in horticulture to maintain, and heading toward my truck in the driveway. Lucas was asking questions, an endless stream of 7-year-old logic that wanted to know why we were leaving, where we were going, whether Grandma Gloria was sick, whether we could stop for chicken nuggets on the way home, whether his action figure could ride in the front seat this one time, but I was only half listening. The other half of my brain was trying to figure out what kind of emergency would make my mother call me in the middle of a social obligation and tell me to leave immediately without explanation. Somewhere between buckling Lucas into his booster seat and starting the truck, it hit me. That feeling you get when you realize the ground beneath you isn't as solid as you thought. When you understand that something you'd been treating as background noise was actually the opening notes of a symphony you really didn't want to hear. The kind of feeling that makes you check your rearview mirror more often than usual and wonder if you've been sleepwalking through your own life while someone else was writing the script. This was going to be one of those stories. The kind where you look back later and realize that the villain wasn't hiding in the shadows or lurking in some dark alley. They were standing right there between you and the canapes, smiling and passing you champagne while they planned your exit strategy. I pulled out of the driveway, leaving behind the warm glow of the house and the sound of polite laughter, and headed toward whatever Gloria had seen that scared her badly enough to blow up my evening. Lucas was already humming to himself in the back seat, crisis averted in his mind, because kids have that magical ability to move on from disappointment in about 45 seconds. Me? I was gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than necessary and wondering what the hell I was about to drive into. Let me tell you something about Olivia that I should have paid more attention to. She was perfect. And I don't mean that in the way guys say their wives are perfect when they're trying to score points at dinner parties. I mean she was surgically, suspiciously, almost algorithmically perfect. Tonight at the party, she'd been operating at peak performance. Laugh calibrated to exactly the right volume. Hand touches deployed with strategic precision. Eyes doing that thing where they crinkled just enough to suggest genuine warmth without actually committing to any real emotion. It was the kind of performance that would make a method actor weep with envy. She could have sold beachfront property to fish. Hell, she probably could have convinced the fish to take out a second mortgage and invest in timeshares for their extended families. That was Olivia's superpower, and for the longest time, I thought I was lucky to have married someone who could navigate social situations like a cruise missile with excellent hair and a degree in hospitality management. Me? I'm loud-mouthed and suspicious by occupation and habit. I run a roofing safety startup, which means I spend my days convincing contractors that falling off buildings is bad for business and that maybe, just maybe, investing in proper equipment is cheaper than wrongful death lawsuits. It's made me professionally paranoid. When someone tells me don't worry about it, I immediately start worrying about it. When someone says trust me, I start looking for the exits. And when my wife of 8 years suddenly becomes even more perfect than usual, my internal alarm system starts playing heavy metal at volumes that would violate noise ordinances. The thing is, Olivia had been growing distant for months. Not in the obvious, we need to talk, way that you see in bad rom-coms, but in the subtle ways that are actually way more terrifying. New gym routines that started at weird hours, 5:30 in the morning, 9 at night, sometimes during her lunch break, even though her office was 20 minutes from any decent gym. She'd come back glowing and refreshed, smelling like expensive body wash I didn't recognize, talking about her amazing workout in a way that sounded like she was reading from a script someone had written for her. Then there were the phone locks. Olivia used to leave her phone lying around like it was a magazine she'd already read. Now it was glued to her hand, face down on every surface, password protected with the kind of security you'd expect from someone guarding nuclear launch codes. When I'd joke about it, "What? You got state secrets in there?" she'd laugh it off with that perfect laugh and say something about work emails and client confidentiality and how she didn't want to accidentally pocket dial someone important during yoga. The credit card charges were my favorite part, though. And by favorite, I mean the ones that made me lie awake at 3 in the morning staring at the ceiling and wondering if I was losing my mind. Boutique hotels downtown. High-end salons that charged what I used to make in a week. Restaurants I'd never been to. At times when she'd told me she was working late or having dinner with clients. When I'd asked about them, she had explanations ready. Company events, client meetings, that conference she'd mentioned 3 weeks ago that I apparently hadn't been listening to her talk about. And maybe I hadn't been listening. Maybe I'd been too busy building my business, too focused on making sure Lucas had a college fund and that we could afford the house with the good school district. Maybe I'd been so caught up in being the provider that I'd stopped being the guy who noticed when his wife started acting like an actress playing the role of his wife. I tried to laugh it off because paranoia ages well on me. It's like fine wine or artisanal cheese. It gets more complex and insufferable with time. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that Olivia was just stressed with work, that she was allowed to have her own life, that not everything was a conspiracy theory waiting to be uncovered by some guy who spent too much time thinking about fall protection systems and workplace safety violations. But here's the thing about being professionally paranoid. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes the reason you feel like something's off is because something is catastrophically, divorce attorney retainer fee levels of off. Lucas was my anchor through all of this. 7 years old, sticky with perpetual evidence of whatever he'd eaten in the last hour, and armed with a rotating collection of superhero t-shirts that he insisted had to be washed and ready for specific days of the week. Monday was Spider-Man. Tuesday was Batman. Wednesday was some character from a show I couldn't keep track of that involved robots and friendship and probably a lot of merchandise opportunities. He called me Papa Bear, which was better branding than anything I'd managed to come up with for my company. I tried about 15 different names before settling on Summit Safety Solutions, which sounded professional and boring and exactly like every other safety company in the tri-state area. But Papa Bear stuck. It was perfect. It made me sound protective and cuddly and slightly dangerous if you messed with my cub, which was pretty much accurate. Lucas didn't notice that his mother was distant. Or if he did, he didn't care in the way that kids don't care about the stuff adults obsess over. She was still there for breakfast, still helped with homework, still did the bedtime routine on the nights when I was working late or traveling for client meetings. To him, everything was fine. His world was dinosaurs and Legos and the ongoing debate about whether Batman could beat Superman in a fight if they were both having a bad day. I envied that. I envied his ability to exist in the present without constantly analyzing every interaction for signs of impending disaster. But I also knew that my job, my actual job as his father, was to do that analysis for him, to be the early warning system, to make sure that whatever storm was brewing didn't catch him by surprise and sweep him away before he even knew what was happening. I told myself Gloria had to be overreacting. My mother had a tendency toward the dramatic when it came to family safety. She was the kind of woman who checked the locks twice, who made us call when we got home from anywhere, who treated every slight deviation from the plan like it was a 5-point crisis requiring immediate intervention. It came from raising 3 boys mostly on her own after my dad died, from being the sole line of defense against a world that she fundamentally didn't trust to keep her kids safe. So when she called in the middle of Olivia's birthday party with that tone in her voice, that drop everything and move tone that I'd only heard maybe 3 times in my entire life, I assumed she was being her usual overprotective self. Maybe she'd seen something on the news about traffic accidents and wanted to make sure we weren't driving home late. Maybe she'd had a bad dream. Maybe she'd found some article online about birthday party food poisoning and decided we needed to evacuate before someone served us questionable shrimp. But even as I drove away from that house, Lucas humming in the back seat and the party lights fading in my rearview mirror, a part of me knew. The part that had been cataloging all those little inconsistencies for months, filing them away in a mental folder labeled things that don't add up. The part that had been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the moment when all those perfectly reasonable explanations would reveal themselves to be exactly what they looked like. Lies wrapped in expensive paper and tied with a bow made of my own willingness to believe that everything was fine. Gloria wouldn't have called like that unless she'd seen something, known something, confirmed something that made her scared enough to pull the emergency brake on my evening and tell me to grab my son and run. And as I drove through the dark streets toward my mother's house, toward whatever revelation was waiting for me there, I realized that I'd been living in a marriage where the villain had been there all along, smiling and perfect, and standing right next to me at parties, and I'd been too busy trying to be the good husband to notice that I was actually just another prop in someone else's carefully staged production. The show was about to get real interesting, and I had a feeling the next act wasn't going to involve cake. Lucas's laugh is a short, perfect thing that makes every bad plan look forgivable. It's this burst of pure, unfiltered joy that sounds like someone opened a window in a stuffy room and let all the good air rush in at once. He doesn't laugh at things that are actually funny by adult standards. He laughs at fart jokes, at the way his action figures fall over when he sets them up wrong, at my attempts to do voices when I'm reading him bedtime stories. He laughs at life in a way I forgot how to do somewhere between my first mortgage payment and the 3rd time I had to explain to a contractor why OSHA regulations weren't suggestions for people who are scared of heights. That laugh is what got me through the drive to Gloria's house. Lucas was in the back seat doing his usual running commentary on everything we passed. Papa Bear, look, that car is blue like my toothbrush, and do you think dinosaurs would like pizza? And other observations that made perfect sense in his 7-year-old universe. I kept my eyes on the road and my hands at 10 and 2, but in my head I was already running through worst-case scenarios like I was studying for a test I desperately wanted to fail. The thing about Lucas is that he liked bedtime stories where the hero gets lost on purpose so the plot can improve. Not the sanitized Disney versions where everything works out because of magic or true love or some fairy godmother with excellent timing. He wanted stories where the main character screwed up, wandered into the wrong forest, trusted the wrong talking animal, and then had to figure their way out using nothing but stubbornness and maybe a sharp stick. Papa Bear, he'd tell me seriously, his face smashed into his dinosaur pillow. The best part is when they don't know what to do, and then they figure it out anyway. Kid was a philosopher and didn't even know it. He was teaching me life lessons while I was trying to teach him not to eat cereal directly from the box, like some kind of feral goblin. He was territorial about dinosaurs in a way that suggested he might have a future in contract law or organized crime. Nobody touched his dinosaur collection without permission. Nobody rearranged them. Nobody, and I mean nobody, was allowed to suggest that any dinosaur other than the Tyrannosaurus Rex was the king of dinosaurs. He'd written a 3-page essay about it for school that his teacher had described as passionate and surprisingly well-researched for a 2nd grader, and maybe a little intense. That was my boy. Intense. Focused. Absolutely certain about the things that mattered to him. His cereal was another battleground. He had a rotation system that would make a military quartermaster weep with pride. Mondays were Cheerios. Tuesdays were the chocolate cereal that Olivia disapproved of, but that I bought anyway, because life is short and breakfast should be fun. Wednesdays through Fridays had their own assignments, and God help you if you tried to disrupt the schedule. I'd made the mistake once, of suggesting he try a different cereal on a Tuesday, and he'd looked at me like I'd proposed we burn down the house and live in the woods eating tree bark. Papa Bear, he'd said with the kind of patience you use when explaining something to someone who's being deliberately obtuse. Tuesday is chocolate cereal day. That's how it works. If we change it, then what's the point of having days? I had no comeback for that. The kid had a point. Structure matters. Routine matters. Knowing what to expect matters, especially when you're 7 and the world is this huge, chaotic place full of adults who keep making decisions that don't make any sense. I swore to him once, sitting on the edge of his bed after a nightmare about monsters that lived in the heating vents, that nothing would ever take me away from him, that I would always be there, that Papa Bear wasn't going anywhere, not for anything, not ever. I swore it to him and to the ceiling fan that was rotating lazily above us, clicking with every revolution like it was keeping time for my promise. That promise felt weightier now, after Mom's call, after the urgency in her voice, after the feeling in my gut that something was coming that I couldn't yet see but could definitely feel. Like standing on a beach and knowing the tide is about to turn even though the water looks calm. If someone was about to try to take me out, and that's where my brain was going. Because when your mother tells you to grab your kid and run, you start thinking in terms of active threats and exit strategies. They weren't just targeting me. They were targeting the cartoon dinosaur fortress we'd built in the living room. They were targeting Tuesday chocolate cereal and bedtime stories about heroes who got lost on purpose. They were targeting every stupid dad joke I'd ever told, and every time Lucas had rolled his eyes and laughed anyway, because deep down he thought I was hilarious even when I absolutely wasn't. I became a father with a mission statement that night, somewhere between the birthday party and Gloria's house. It wasn't complicated or poetic. It was simple. Protect the small, sticky things at all costs. Protect the laugh. Protect the dinosaur collection. Protect the Tuesday cereal routine and the bedtime stories and the way he called me Papa Bear like it was my actual legal name. Also, I practiced my dad jokes in case of interrogations. This sounds insane, and it probably was, but hear me out. Dad jokes are useful as psychological warfare. They're designed to make people groan and suffer through uncomfortable humor until they'll agree to anything just to make it stop. If I was going to end up in some kind of confrontation, and my gut was telling me that confrontation was coming whether I wanted it or not, then I wanted every weapon in my arsenal, including puns about construction equipment and wordplay about roofing materials that would make hostage negotiators question their career choices. Papa Bear, why are we going to Grandma Gloria's? Lucas asked from the back seat, his voice pulling me out of my increasingly paranoid thought spiral. Because Grandma wants to see us, I said, which was technically true even if it was missing about 75% of the actual context. But we were at the party. There was cake. Good cake. Not the weird healthy cake you make that tastes like with chips and sadness. Hey, my banana bread is delicious and you know it. It's okay, he conceded. But it's not cake. Cake has frosting. Your banana bread has lies and disappointment. 7 years old and already a food critic. I'd raised him too well. We'll get cake later, I promised. Better cake. The kind with the frosting that's basically just sugar having an identity crisis. He seemed satisfied with that answer and went back to making sound effects for whatever battle his action figures were having in his imagination. I focused on driving and tried not to think about all the ways this night could go sideways. The truth was, I'd been a control freak since the day Lucas was born. Maybe even before that, from the moment Olivia told me she was pregnant, and I'd gone into full tactical planning mode, reading every parenting book I could find, baby-proofing the house like we were preparing for a home invasion by very small, very determined criminals, practicing diaper changes on a doll that one of Olivia's friends had given us as a joke. When he finally arrived, 6 pounds, 11 ounces, screaming like he'd been personally offended by the concept of being born, I'd held him and felt something shift in my chest, like someone had installed new programming and suddenly every decision, every plan, every stupid risk I'd ever considered taking was now filtered through this new question. But what about Lucas? That question had saved me from making a lot of bad choices over the years. It had also made me insufferable at parties, where I couldn't stop myself from pointing out safety hazards and asking people if they'd checked the batteries in their smoke detectors recently. Olivia used to think it was charming. Then she thought it was annoying. Lately, she'd stopped commenting on it at all, which should have been my first clue that her attention was elsewhere. I pulled into Gloria's driveway and killed the engine. The house was lit up like she'd been expecting us, which she had been, because Gloria didn't make dramatic phone calls and then go to bed early. Lucas was already unbuckling himself, ready to bounce into Grandma's house and demand cookies and attention in equal measure. "Stay close to me, okay, buddy?" I said, trying to keep my voice casual even though every instinct I had was screaming that we were walking into something. "Okay, Papa Bear," he said, grabbing my hand with his sticky little fingers. And just like that, I was ready for whatever Gloria had to tell me. Because I had my mission statement. I had my anchor. I had this small, sticky thing who thought I was the funniest person alive and who trusted me to keep him safe from monsters in the heating vents and whatever else was coming. Nothing was going to take that away from me. Not Olivia, not whatever emergency had my mother spooked, not anything. I'd made a promise to a 7-year-old and his ceiling fan, and I intended to keep it, even if it meant burning the whole world down to do it. Gloria's living room looked like a detective's office had exploded into a grandmother's house, and they decided to just coexist peacefully. There were doilies on the coffee table, sure, but there were also photographs spread across those doilies like evidence at a crime scene, which, as it turned out, was pretty much exactly what they were. My mother had always had detective instincts. When I was 15 and told her I was studying at Mike's house, she somehow knew I was actually behind the bowling alley smoking cigarettes I'd stolen from my uncle's coat pocket and trying to look cool in front of Jenny Martinez. When my brother told her he'd gotten a B on his math test, she knew it was actually a D- before he'd even finished the sentence. The woman could smell a lie from 3 counties away and had the follow-through to back it up. So when she'd called me at the party with that voice, that evacuate immediately voice, I should have known she wasn't being dramatic. Gloria didn't do dramatic. Gloria did thorough, methodical, and occasionally terrifying when she'd compiled enough evidence to ruin your entire life. Lucas was in the kitchen with a cookie the size of his head, and Gloria had installed him in front of her iPad with some cartoon about talking trains, which gave us about 15 minutes before he'd come looking for more snacks or attention. She gestured to the couch with the kind of authority that made you sit down without questioning it, and I sat. "I've been watching her," Gloria said, which was possibly the most ominous way to start any conversation with your adult son. "Mom, that sounds..." "Don't." She held up one hand. "Don't tell me it sounds crazy. Don't tell me I'm overstepping. Don't tell me anything until you've looked at what I'm about to show you, and then you can tell me I'm wrong." She was using her courtroom voice. Gloria had never been in a courtroom in her life except for jury duty, but she had a voice that suggested she'd prosecuted were criminals and won. I shut my mouth and waited. She'd seen Olivia with a man downtown. This wasn't a "I think I saw her" situation. This was "I followed them for 3 blocks and took photographs" situation. Gloria pulled out her phone. She was more tech-savvy than half the millennials I knew, and started swiping through images that made my stomach drop into my shoes. Olivia, coming out of the Meridian Hotel downtown. The fancy one where rooms started at $300 a night, and the bar served cocktails with names like Midnight Regret and Poor Life Choices. She was wearing an outfit I recognized, the blue dress she'd said she wore to a client dinner 3 weeks ago, the one she'd come home from smelling like expensive wine and making excuses about traffic. There were more photos. Olivia going into the hotel at different times. Always dressed nice. Always alone. Always with that look on her face that I now recognized as her performance mode, expression, the one where she was playing a role and nailing every beat. Then there were the photos of the man. Tall, fit in that way that suggested either a gym membership or a military background, with dark hair and the kind of jaw that made you want to punch it on principle. He was leaving the hotel at different times than Olivia, which was the kind of operational security you learned in training or from watching too many spy movies. "Who is he?" I asked, even though something in my gut was already putting pieces together. Gloria's face did something complicated. "You tell me. You're the one who went pale the second you saw his face." I had gone pale. I could feel it, that cold, clammy sensation that starts in your chest and spreads outward until your fingers feel numb and your brain is screaming at you to run or fight, or do literally anything except sit on your mother's couch staring at photographs of your wife's affair. Except it wasn't just an affair. I knew that face. I knew it from a lifetime ago, from a version of myself that I'd locked away in a drawer labeled "Things We Don't Talk About Anymore." "Victor Ramos," I said, and the name tasted like old blood and bad decisions. Gloria nodded slowly. You knew him? I knew him. Past tense. Emphatic past tense. The kind of past tense you use when you're trying to convince yourself that history stays buried and doesn't come climbing out of hotel rooms downtown to sleep with your wife. Victor had been there during my last deployment. We'd been in the same unit for about 8 months, long enough to know each other's coffee orders and weapon preferences, not long enough to write home about what great friends we were. He'd been charming in a way that made rules go on vacation. The kind of guy who could talk a supply sergeant out of extra rations, convince a local interpreter to give us intel they probably shouldn't have, and generally operate in the gray areas that made commanding officers nervous but grudgingly grateful. He was good at what he did. Too good. The kind of good that makes you wonder if maybe they're enjoying it a little too much. After a firefight that went sideways, and I mean catastrophically sideways, the kind of sideways that ends up in classified reports and therapy sessions you're not allowed to talk about, Victor disappeared. Not dead, not captured, just gone. Vanished into some gray industry where former military guys go when they decide the regular world is too boring and they've got skills that certain people will pay good money for. I'd heard rumors over the years. Victor Ramos consulting for private security firms. Victor Ramos working contracts in places that didn't officially exist on any mission logs. Victor Ramos showing up in cities where bad things were about to happen to people who probably deserved it, but also probably shouldn't have had it happen in quite such a permanent way. And now Victor Ramos was apparently sleeping with my wife and checking into hotels like they were running some kind of twisted loyalty program. I felt that old professional cold settle in my veins. It's a sensation I hadn't felt in years. That combination of hyperfocus and detachment that happens when you realize you're not in civilian life anymore. You're in a tactical situation, and you need to start thinking like someone who's been trained to assess threats and neutralize them. There's more, Gloria said, which was the absolute last thing I wanted to hear, but also exactly what I needed to hear. She showed me phone records. She'd somehow, and I didn't ask how because plausible deniability is a beautiful thing, gotten access to Olivia's call logs. Pages of them. Calls to the same number at weird hours. 2 in the morning, 4:30 in the afternoon. During times when she told me she was in meetings or at the gym or running errands. She showed me credit card statements that painted a picture of a woman living a completely different life than the one she'd presented to me. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, boutique purchases, all charged to a card I didn't recognize, which meant she'd opened a line of credit I didn't know about. How did you even get all this? I asked. Gloria gave me a look that suggested I was asking stupid questions. I have friends. Friends who owe me favors. Friends who know that when Gloria asks for something, it's because someone needs protecting. My mother, the suburban mob boss. I'd have been proud if I wasn't currently processing the fact that my marriage was a performance and my wife had been rehearsing with someone from my past who specialized in making problems disappear. Mom, this looks bad, but maybe. There's a recording, she said, cutting me off. Of course there was a recording. Because why would this nightmare stop at photographs and phone records when it could go full audiobook? She played it on her phone. The quality was decent, too decent, which meant someone had been close enough to use professional equipment or had hacked into something they definitely shouldn't have hacked into. I heard Olivia's voice, but not the Olivia voice I knew. This was business Olivia. Cold Olivia. Olivia discussing logistics like she was planning a corporate merger and not whatever the hell this actually was. We need to make it look like an accident, she said on the recording, clear as day, casual as ordering coffee. Victor's voice responded. That's the plan. Insurance pays out better that way. Cleaner for the kid too. The kid. Lucas. They were talking about Lucas like he was a line item in a spreadsheet. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. I'd processed fear and moved past it about 30 seconds ago. This was rage. Pure, focused, cold rage that made everything else fade into background noise. If Victor was involved, this wasn't an affair. Affairs were messy and emotional and involved crying and bad poetry and people making terrible decisions because feelings. This was logistics. This was planning. This was 2 people who knew exactly what they were doing and had calculated the costs and benefits like they were flipping a house instead of plotting to flip my entire existence into a grave. And logistics, as I knew from both my military experience and my current job, were significantly less forgiving than bad poetry. Logistics meant timelines. Logistics meant execution plans. Logistics meant that somewhere in whatever scheme they'd cooked up, there was a date circled on a calendar, and that date was probably coming up fast. When did you get this recording? I asked. Yesterday, Gloria said. I've been following her for 2 weeks, ever since I saw them together downtown. I knew something was wrong. Mother's intuition. Mother's intuition, military-grade surveillance skills, and apparently a complete disregard for privacy laws. God bless Gloria. I looked at the photographs again. Victor, smiling that smile I remembered. The one that said he knew something you didn't, and he was going to enjoy watching you figure it out. Olivia, playing her part perfectly, probably thinking she was so clever, so careful, so sure that her idiot husband was too busy with his roofing company and dad jokes to notice. They'd underestimated 2 things. First, they'd underestimated Gloria, which was a rookie mistake that people only made once. Second, they'd underestimated what I was willing to do to protect Lucas. I stood up, my decision already made somewhere in the part of my brain that still remembered how to operate in hostile territory. I need to make some calls, I said. Gloria nodded. I figured you would. There's coffee in the kitchen. The strong kind. I was going to need it. Because Victor Ramos had just made the biggest tactical error of his life. He'd brought a fight to a man who had everything to lose, and a mother who collected evidence like some people collected stamps. This was going to get messy, but at least now I knew what I was dealing with. And knowing, as they say, is half the battle. The other half is winning. My mother had an old contact who bragged less about coffee and more about watching people with binoculars. His name was Sal, and he was a retired insurance investigator who'd spent 30 years catching people faking workplace injuries and committing fraud. Now he spent his golden years doing freelance observation work, which was a polite way of saying he spied on people for cash and didn't ask too many questions about why you needed someone followed. Gloria had apparently hired him 3 weeks ago, which meant she'd been sitting on this information, building her case like a prosecutor preparing for trial, waiting for the exact right moment to drop the hammer. That moment, as it turned out, was right when Olivia was performing her Oscar-worthy turn as the devoted wife at her own birthday party. The timing was chef's kiss levels of poetic justice, and I had to admire Gloria's dramatic instincts even while I was processing the fact that my life had become a true crime podcast waiting to happen. She spread the evidence across her kitchen counter like we were playing the world's most depressing game of Clue. Except instead of Colonel Mustard in the library with the candlestick, it was my wife in a downtown hotel with a former mercenary and a life insurance policy that was suddenly looking very suspicious. The photographs Sal had taken were professional quality. Olivia entering the Meridian Hotel at 2:15 on a Thursday afternoon. Victor leaving at 4:45, looking relaxed and satisfied in a way that made me want to punch a wall. Different days, different times, same routine. They weren't even being that careful, which either meant they thought they were untouchable or they'd gotten lazy with their operational security. I was betting on the latter. People always get sloppy when they think they're winning. This one's my favorite, Gloria said, sliding a photo toward me with the kind of vindictive satisfaction that made me remember why nobody ever messed with her twice. It was Olivia and Victor having coffee at some trendy downtown place with exposed brick and menu items that probably cost more than my truck payment. They were sitting close, heads together, and Olivia was laughing at something he'd said. Not her public laugh, the one she deployed at parties and work functions, but her real laugh. The one I'd heard less and less over the past 2 years. The one I'd thought maybe didn't exist anymore. Turned out it existed. She'd just been saving it for someone else. When was this taken? I asked, keeping my voice level even though I wanted to throw something through a window. Last Tuesday. You were in Pittsburgh for that contractor conference. Right. The conference where I'd spent 3 days learning about updated OSHA regulations and the latest innovations in fall protection systems. I'd texted Olivia every night, told her about the boring seminars and the hotel with the weird shower that only had 2 temperature settings, Arctic and surface of the sun. She'd texted back with sympathetic emojis and told me she missed me. She'd been lying through her perfectly whitened teeth. Gloria produced receipts next. Actual, physical receipts that Sal had somehow obtained, which I was fairly certain involved either bribing hotel staff or dumpster diving, and I really didn't want to know which. Room service billed to room 847 at the Meridian. 2 entrees. A bottle of wine that cost more than I'd spent on our last anniversary dinner. Charged to a credit card in Olivia's name that I'd never seen before. She opened a separate account. Gloria said, reading my expression. Been funneling money into it for about 6 months. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. She's been planning this for a while. The methodical nature of it was almost impressive. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. This was premeditation. This was spreadsheets and timelines and careful planning. Olivia had always been organized. It was one of the things I'd loved about her when we first met. She made lists. She planned ahead. She thought through contingencies. I just never thought she'd apply those skills to plotting my demise. Gloria even had voice recordings. Multiple recordings, actually, which meant Sal had either bugged something or had access to technology that was definitely not legal for civilian use. I didn't ask. Plausible deniability was becoming my new best friend. She played them for me one by one, and each one was worse than the last. In the first recording, Olivia and Victor were discussing money. Specifically, the life insurance policy I'd taken out when Lucas was born. $1 million, which had seemed responsible at the time. Enough to make sure Lucas and Olivia would be taken care of if something happened to me. Enough to pay off the mortgage, cover college, give them security. Now it just looked like a prize they were planning to collect. The policy pays double for accidental death, Victor said on the recording, his voice casual like he was discussing weekend plans. I know, Olivia replied. That's $2 million. Minus the mortgage and the business debts, we're looking at about 1.6 clear. They'd said we. Like they were a team. Like they were partners planning a future together, and the only thing standing between them, and that future was me continuing to breathe. In another recording, they discussed Lucas. That one was harder to listen to. Victor asking if the kid would be a problem. Olivia saying no, that Lucas was young enough that he'd adjust, that kids were resilient, that he'd get over it eventually. She talked about my son, our son, the kid I'd raised from day one. The kid who called me Papa Bear and made me read dinosaur books until I had them memorized, like he was an inconvenient variable in an equation. A minor complication that could be managed with appropriate resources and time. I had to pause the recording, had to stand up and walk to the window and remind myself that breaking things wouldn't help Lucas, wouldn't solve this problem, wouldn't do anything except make me feel momentarily better before making everything worse. Gloria waited. She'd raised 3 boys. She knew when to push and when to let someone process. When I sat back down, she played the last recording. This one was from 2 days ago, which meant whatever they were planning was imminent. Close enough that they were discussing final details. Tuesday works, Victor said. He'll be home alone during the day. Olivia has that work thing, the kids in school. Easy access, make it look like a home invasion gone wrong or a gas leak. Quick, clean, tragic. Tuesday. That was 4 days away. For days until they planned to turn me into a cautionary tale and a life insurance payout. There's a problem, though, Olivia said on the recording, and I heard something in her voice. Hesitation, maybe, or calculation. With her, it was hard to tell the difference. What problem? Victor asked. His mother, Gloria. She's been acting weird lately. Watching me. I think she suspects something. Victor laughed. She's an old lady. What's she going to do, knit us to death? Oh, Victor. You beautiful, stupid man. You had no idea what you were dealing with. Gloria turned off the recording and looked at me with an expression that was part vindication and part fury. An old lady, she said. I'll show him an old lady. Despite everything, despite the rage and the betrayal and the cold knowledge that my wife had been planning to murder me for insurance money, I almost smiled. Victor had made 2 critical errors. First, he'd underestimated me. Second, and far more fatal, he'd underestimated Gloria. There's more, Gloria said, pulling out another folder. Because of course there was more. This nightmare had layers like an onion made of betrayal and felonies. She showed me bank statements. Olivia had been withdrawing cash in small amounts. Never enough to trigger automatic reports, but enough that over 6 months it added up to almost $30,000. Money that had vanished into whatever planning they'd been doing. Equipment, probably. Bribes. Resources. Whatever you needed when you were planning to commit murder and make it look accidental. There were also emails. Printed emails, which meant Sal had somehow gotten access to Olivia's account. And again, I didn't ask how because I really didn't want to know what laws we were breaking in pursuit of not letting me get murdered. The emails were coded, mostly. References to the project and timeline adjustments and securing the package. But there was one that was more explicit, sent from Victor to Olivia about 2 weeks ago. Your husband is a good man, it read. That's going to make this harder for you, isn't it? But remember, good men don't pay bills. Dead husbands with life insurance policies pay bills. Stay focused. My wife had apparently needed a pep talk to stay motivated about murdering me. That was a new low even for a situation that had already excavated several basement levels beneath rock bottom. I looked at all the evidence spread across Gloria's counter. Photographs and receipts and recordings and emails. A complete dossier of betrayal, methodically compiled by a 70-year-old woman who knitted Christmas sweaters and made pierogies from scratch and apparently ran a side hustle as a private investigator who didn't mess around. Mom, I said slowly, you realize you've basically built a federal case here. Good, she said, because if you're planning to go to the police, you'll need it. I shook my head. I'm not going to the police. Her eyes narrowed. What are you going to do? I looked at the photos of Victor again. At his smug face and his confident posture and the way he'd clearly thought this was going to be easy. He'd served with me. He knew what I was capable of in a combat situation. But he'd forgotten, or maybe he'd never really understood, that combat situations aren't limited to foreign countries and official deployments. Sometimes combat comes to your kitchen counter in the form of evidence compiled by your mother and a retired insurance investigator named Sal. I'm going to give them exactly what they're planning to give me, I said. Except I'm going to do it better. Gloria studied my face for a long moment. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. Good. You'll need help. I know. I have Sal on retainer. He's surprisingly good with surveillance equipment. Also, he knows a man who can get things that regular people shouldn't be able to get. My mother, ladies and gentlemen. Suburban crime boss with a heart of gold and a network of geriatric accomplices who probably had more classified skills than half of my old unit. I'll need a few days to plan, I said. You have until Tuesday. After that, they'll make their move, and you'll be reacting instead of acting. She was right. Tuesday was D-Day, the day they'd planned to remove me from the equation and cash in their lottery ticket. But they'd made one critical mistake in all their careful planning. They'd forgotten that the best defense is a good offense, and I'd been trained by the U.S. military and refined by years of managing contractors who thought safety regulations were optional. I knew how to plan. I knew how to execute. And most importantly, I knew how to protect what was mine. Tuesday was going to be very interesting. Just not in the way Olivia and Victor were expecting. Victor called my office on Monday morning like we were old buddies catching up after a few years apart. Like he hadn't been sleeping with my wife and plotting my murder. Like this was just a casual, hey man, let's grab a beer situation instead of what it actually was, a predator checking to see if his prey suspected anything. Long time no talk, he said when I answered, his voice carrying that same easy confidence I remembered from our deployment days. Heard you were doing the civilian thing. Roofing safety, right? That's pretty far from clearing buildings in Kandahar. Yeah, well, the benefits are better and people shoot at me less, I said, keeping my tone light even though my hand was gripping the phone hard enough that I was surprised the screen didn't crack. What's up, Victor? It's been, 6 years? About that. I'm in town for a few days. Thought we could catch up. You still drink beer, or did marriage turn you into one of those kombucha guys? I forced a laugh. Still beer? Where you want to meet? We agreed on a sports bar downtown called Flanagan. It was the kind of place with 15 TVs showing different games, wings that came in 40 flavors, and enough ambient noise that you could have a conversation without anyone overhearing unless they were really trying. Victor suggested it, which meant he'd scouted it already, knew the layout, knew the exits. Old habits die hard when you've been trained to think tactically. I got there 15 minutes early because I wanted to choose my seat, wanted to see him come in, wanted every tiny advantage I could squeeze out of this meeting. I picked a booth with a view of the door and ordered a beer I had no intention of drinking more than 2 sips of. I needed to stay sharp. I needed to watch every word, every expression, every tell. Victor swaggered in at exactly 6 o'clock like a man who believed his own press clippings. He'd aged well, still fit, still moving with that controlled grace that came from years of staying ready for violence. He was wearing jeans and a dark Henley that probably cost more than my entire outfit, and he had that look about him. The look that said he'd seen bad things, done worse things, and slept fine afterward. He slid into the booth across from me with a grin that would have seemed friendly if I didn't know he was planning to make me a statistic. "Man, you look good," he said, flagging down a waitress with the kind of casual authority that made people respond without questioning it. "Domestic life, treating you well?" "Can't complain," I said. "Got a kid now. 7 years old. Lucas. He's the best thing that ever happened to me." Something flickered across Victor's face. Brief enough that if I hadn't been watching for it, I would have missed it. Discomfort, maybe. Or calculation. Reminding him that I wasn't just a target. I was a father. That murdering me meant orphaning a kid. If it bothered him, he recovered fast. "That's great, man. Really. Family's important." He ordered a beer from the waitress, leaned back in his seat. "So what's this roofing safety thing about? You went from kicking doors to worrying about hard hats." "Someone's got to keep idiots from falling off buildings," I said. "Turns out there's decent money in it. Plus, nobody's trying to blow me up, which is a nice change of pace." We did the catch-up dance for about 20 minutes. Small talk. War stories that were edited for public consumption. The kind of surface-level conversation that men have when they're circling each other and trying to figure out who's going to make the first real move. I told him about my business. He told me about his consulting work, which was code for whatever mercenary nonsense he'd been up to since leaving the service. Somewhere between the buffalo wings and the third beer, his third, my first that I was still nursing, the conversation shifted. "So, I've got a confession," Victor said, and I felt every muscle in my body go still even though I kept my expression casual. "I've been seeing someone. Someone you know, actually." "Yeah," I said, like I was mildly curious and not calculating exactly how hard I'd have to hit him to break his jaw without causing a scene. "Your wife? Olivia." He said it casual, matter of fact, like he was commenting on the weather or mentioning he'd taken up golf. "We've been seeing each other for about 6 months now." I let silence hang there for a beat. 2 beats. Long enough that he'd wonder if I was processing or if I already knew. Long enough to make him uncertain. "I know," I said finally. His expression shifted. Not panic. Victor was too professional for panic, but surprise. Recalculation. He hadn't expected me to know, which meant Olivia hadn't told him about Gloria's surveillance, about the photos, about the fact that his supposedly covert operation had been blown wide open by a 70-year-old woman with binoculars and connections. "You know," he repeated. Not a question. A statement he was testing the weight of. "I know," I said again. "Known for a couple weeks now. Been trying to figure out what to do about it." He studied me across the table. I could see him running scenarios, trying to figure out if this was a trap, if I'd brought backup, if the police were waiting outside. I kept my body language relaxed. Just a guy having a difficult conversation with an old war buddy who happened to be sleeping with his wife. "Look, man," Victor said, leaning forward. "I didn't plan for this to happen. But these things, they just..." "Save it," I cut him off. "I don't need the speech about how you fell in love and couldn't help yourselves. I'm not interested in the romantic narrative." "Okay." He sat back. "What are you interested in?" "The truth. How long you been planning to kill me?" There it was. The question hanging in the air between us like smoke from a gun that hadn't been fired yet. Victor's face went carefully blank. Professional blank. The expression you learn when someone's interrogating you, and you need to give away exactly nothing. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Sure you do. Insurance policy. Make it look like an accident. Tuesday, right? That's the plan. Gas leak or home invasion or whatever creative solution you and Olivia cooked up." He didn't confirm it. Didn't deny it. Just sat there watching me with those cold professional eyes, recalculating everything, trying to figure out how much I knew and how much I was guessing. "You're paranoid," he said finally. "Olivia said you'd been acting strange." Guess she was right. Olivia says a lot of things. Most of them are lies, but she says them so pretty that people believe her. I took a small sip of my beer. "Thing is, Victor, I'm not people. I know who you are. I know what you do. And I know that you don't just happen to start sleeping with the wife of an old unit buddy without having an agenda. Maybe my agenda is that she's hot and you're boring," he said, some edge creeping into his voice now. "Maybe. Or maybe your agenda involves $2 million in life insurance money and a woman who's willing to play grieving widow while you both cash in and ride off into the sunset." His jaw tightened. Just slightly. Just enough. "Here's what I don't get," I continued. keeping my voice conversational even though every word was a knife I was sliding between his ribs. You served with me. You know what I'm capable of. You know I'm not some civilian who's going to roll over and die easy. So either you've gotten really arrogant or really stupid, or you genuinely thought I'd never figure it out. You're making a lot of accusations, Victor said carefully. I'm making observations. There's a difference. I set my beard down, folded my hands on the table. So here's how this is going to go. You're going to walk away, leave town, disappear back into whatever hole you crawled out of, and you're going to tell Olivia that the deal's off. He laughed. Actually laughed, like I'd told a joke. Or what? Or I make sure everyone knows exactly what you've been planning. The police, your employers, everyone in your professional network who might be interested to know that Victor Ramos has gotten sloppy enough to leave evidence all over town while plotting to murder a former brother-in-arms for insurance money. You don't have evidence, he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. I have photos, recordings, bank statements, emails. I have enough evidence to put you away for conspiracy to commit murder, and that's before we even get to the actual murder you were planning to commit. I leaned forward. My mother's a very thorough woman, Victor. You called her an old lady. That was your first mistake. His face had gone pale. Not scared. Victor didn't do scared, but definitely concerned. He was running calculations, trying to figure out how to salvage this, whether to cut his losses or double down. This doesn't have to get ugly, I said. You walk away, this ends here. No police. No drama. You just disappear, and Olivia and I handle our failing marriage like adults. And if I don't? I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile you learn when you've seen people make bad decisions and have to live with the consequences. Then Tuesday gets really interesting. Just not in the way you were planning. We sat there for a long moment. Two men who'd once cleared rooms together, who'd trusted each other with their lives, now on opposite sides of a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Victor stood up, threw some cash on the table for his beers, looked down at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You're making a mistake, he said. Probably, but it's my mistake to make. He walked out. I watched him go, watched him move through the crowd and out the door, and I knew, absolutely knew, that he wasn't going to walk away. That he'd go straight to Olivia, tell her I knew, and they'd accelerate their timeline or change their plan or do whatever desperate people do when they realize the prey has teeth. I sat there with my mostly full beer and my racing thoughts and realized that I'd just declared war. Not the official kind with rules and Geneva Conventions. The other kind. The kind where you fight in the shadows and hope you come out the other side with your soul mostly intact. I paid my tab, left the bar, and drove home to my wife who was planning to kill me and my son who still thought the world was made of dinosaurs and serial routines. Tuesday was going to be a hell of a day, but at least now Victor knew I was coming. That was important. Predators get sloppy when they realize the prey is actually a bigger predator wearing a victim costume. Time to take mine off. Olivia doubled down on her performance after my meeting with Victor, which told me everything I needed to know about how that conversation had gone. Victor had absolutely told her that I knew. And instead of panicking or coming clean or doing literally anything honest, she decided to crank her act up to 11 and hope I'd fall for it. She came home Tuesday morning, the actual Tuesday they'd planned to kill me, which added a layer of dark comedy to the whole situation, with coffee from my favorite place and those pastries I liked from the bakery that was inconveniently located across town. She was wearing soft clothes, the kind she knew I found attractive, and her hair was down in that casual way that looked effortless, but actually took 30 minutes and several products. I've been thinking, she said, setting the coffee and pastries on the kitchen counter with the kind of gentle precision you'd use when disarming a bomb. About us. About how distant we've been. I looked up from my laptop where I'd been pretending to review safety equipment invoices while actually coordinating with Gloria's network of geriatric accomplices. Yeah, I want to fix this, she said, and her eyes did that thing. That soft, vulnerable thing that had worked on me for 8 years. I know I've been distracted with work. I know I haven't been present. But I love you. I love our family. And I want to get through this. She was good. I had to give her that. If I hadn't heard the recordings of her discussing my murder like it was a business transaction, I might have believed her. Hell, part of me, the part that remembered falling in love with her, the part that had stood at an altar and made promises, wanted to believe her even now. We'll get through this, I said, playing the stunned spouse who had no idea his wife had been rehearsing this scene with her accomplice. It's just been a weird few weeks. Work stress. You know how it is. She moved closer, touched my arm, let relief wash over her face like I'd just given her a reprieve from execution. Which, in a way, I had. Just not the way she thought. I was thinking maybe we could plan a trip, she continued. After this work project wraps up. Just the three of us. Lucas would love Disney World. Or maybe a beach somewhere. A beach. Somewhere far from home, far from witnesses, where accidents happen to tourists all the time and nobody asked too many questions. I could practically see the gears turning in her head, adapting the plan, finding new angles now that the home invasion scenario was blown. That sounds great, I said, smiling like a man who hadn't spent the last 3 days planning a counterstrike with his mother and a retired insurance investigator named Sal. Let me check my schedule. She kissed my cheek. Soft, tender. The kiss of someone who loved me or someone who was counting down the days until I became a memory and a bank deposit. With Olivia, those two things apparently looked identical. Secretly, I'd been calling in favors since Saturday. Every contact I'd made since leaving the service. Every friend who owed me from the old days. Every connection that could help me turn the tables on two people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. First call went to Marcus, an old unit buddy, who could make phones sing opera if you gave him the right motivation and maybe some pizza. He'd done 2 tours with me before getting out and starting a cybersecurity firm that did consulting work for people who needed things done quietly and legally questionable. You need what? Marcus had asked when I explained the situation, his voice carrying that mix of disbelief and grudging admiration that came from knowing me long enough to expect chaos. Remote access to security cameras, phone tracking, and anything else you can get me without actually committing a felony we can't explain away later. That's a tall order. Also, that last part is adorable. You thinking we can avoid felonies. Do your best. I'll buy you that pizza. Make it 3 pizzas, and we have a deal. Marcus came through by Monday night. I had access to every security camera within a 3-block radius of my house, plus live tracking on both Olivia's and Victor's phones. It was almost definitely illegal. It was absolutely necessary. Next, I called Mrs. Patel, my neighbor 3 doors down who everyone assumed was just a sweet elderly lady who baked cookies and complained about people parking too close to her mailbox. What everyone didn't know was that Mrs. Patel had been an engineer for a defense contractor in the 80s and still had connections to people who could acquire things that regular civilians definitely shouldn't have access to. You need what kind of equipment? She'd asked when I showed up at her door with the story. The kind that makes loud noises and creates diversions. Nothing that actually hurts anyone. Just enough to make people reconsider their life choices. She'd looked at me over her reading glasses with an expression that suggested she knew exactly what I was planning and approved wholeheartedly. Give me 2 days. Also, I'm going to need you to help me install that new ceiling fan you've been promising to help with. Deal. Mrs. Patel delivered Sunday afternoon with a box that I didn't inspect too closely because plausible deniability was becoming my religion. Whatever was in there, it was definitely not legal for residential use. It was perfect. Then there was my cousin Aaron, a detective with the city police who had a moral code that included sarcasm and illegal patience for family members who got themselves into situations that required creative interpretations of the law. Let me get this straight, Aaron said when I laid out the situation over beers at his place, away from anyone who might overhear. Your wife and some mercenary asshole are planning to murder you for insurance money. You have evidence of the conspiracy, and instead of bringing it to the police like a normal person, you're planning to. What, exactly? Make it very clear that murdering me was a bad investment strategy. That's the dumbest thing I've heard all week, and I work with cops. He took a long drink of his beer. I'm in. What do you need? Delayed response times. If something happens at my address Tuesday evening, I need maybe 30 minutes before anyone official shows up. 30 minutes is a long time. People could get hurt in 30 minutes. People are going to get hurt either way. I'm just trying to control who and how much. Aaron studied my face for a long moment, then sighed the sigh of a man who'd given up trying to talk sense into his family members. Fine, but you owe me. Big time. Also, if this goes sideways and I lose my badge, you're paying for my kid's college. Deal. By Sunday, I had enough gear to make a spy movie with disappointing lighting and a budget that consisted mostly of favors and implied threats. I had surveillance. I had equipment that Mrs. Patel assured me would create quite the spectacle. I had delayed police response, and I had a detailed map of my own house with every possible entry point marked and every tactical advantage noted. Tuesday was supposed to be the big accident day, according to their plan. According to mine, Tuesday was going to be the day they realized they'd brought a knife to a gunfight, and I'd brought a combination of military training, neighborhood connections, and righteous fury. I spent Monday night playing the good husband. Made dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and meatballs that Lucas actually ate without complaining. Helped with homework, supervised bath time. Read 3 dinosaur books because Lucas couldn't decide which one he wanted, and I wasn't about to deny him on what might be, if everything went wrong, one of our last normal nights together. Olivia played the good wife, smiled at appropriate times, laughed at my terrible jokes, tucked Lucas in with the kind of maternal warmth that would have been touching if I didn't know she'd calculated exactly how much life insurance money she'd get when I was gone. After Lucas was asleep, she suggested we watch a movie. I agreed. We sat on the couch, her head on my shoulder, watching some romantic comedy where everyone's problems got solved in 90 minutes, and nobody was plotting anyone else's murder. It was surreal, peaceful, like we were a normal couple having a normal evening instead of 2 actors in a play where the final act involved betrayal and violence. "I love you," she whispered during a quiet moment in the movie. "I love you too," I said, because that's what the script called for, and I was committed to my performance right up until the moment I burned the whole production down. Tuesday morning, she left for her work event with a kiss and a smile and a promise to be home by 6. Lucas went to school with his Spider-Man backpack and a lunch I'd packed with extra snacks because I'm that kind of dad. And I stayed home, supposedly to catch up on paperwork and invoices. Instead, I prepared for war. Marcus's surveillance system was live by 9. Mrs. Patel's equipment was strategically placed by 10. Aaron sent me a text at 11. "You're insane. Also, dispatch has been informed of a system test in your area this evening. 30-minute window starting at 7 p.m. Don't make me regret this." Gloria called at noon. "Everything ready. As ready as it's going to be." "Good. I'll have Lucas. Don't worry about him. I always worry about him." "I know. That's why you're going to win this." She hung up before I could respond, which was very Gloria. Always getting the last word. Always confident that her plans would work out because she'd spent 70 years making sure they did. Victor and his guys would come expecting to find an easy target. A civilian contractor who'd gotten soft, who'd forgotten his training, who'd be too surprised to fight back effectively. They were going to find out that you can take the soldier out of the combat zone, but you can't take the combat training out of the soldier. Especially when that soldier had a son to protect and a mother who'd taught him that the best defense was overwhelming strategic offense. I spent the afternoon checking equipment, running through scenarios, and practicing my surprised face for when they showed up. I was going to need it. Nothing sells a trap better than looking like you don't know you're setting one. By 6 p.m., everything was in place. The stage was set. The actors were moving into position. Tuesday evening was about to get very educational for everyone involved. Class was in session, and the lesson plan included practical demonstrations of why you don't mess with a man who has everything to lose and absolutely nothing left to prove except that he'll do whatever it takes to protect his family. Welcome to my TED Talk. It's going to be explosive. They came into my house like they owned the place, which was bold considering they were about to discover that ownership is 9/10 of the law, and I had 10/10 of the home field advantage. Olivia arrived first at 6:45, right on schedule, playing her part perfectly. Concerned wife coming home early from her work event because she had a bad feeling. She called out my name as she walked through the door, her voice pitched at that perfect level of worry that would sound great on a 911 call recording later. I was in the kitchen, exactly where I was supposed to be, looking appropriately surprised and completely unaware that this was the beginning of their grand finale. "Hey, you're home early," I said, playing my role. Supportive husband. Clueless target. Man who definitely wasn't about to flip the entire script. "I just wanted to see you," she said, and damn if she wasn't convincing. If I didn't know better, I'd have believed that tone. That soft vulnerability. That suggestion that maybe she'd been having second thoughts about the whole murder-for-profit scheme. But I did know better. And that made all the difference. Victor showed up at 7:15 with two guys who made poor eyebrow choices and probably listed goon as their professional specialty on LinkedIn. They came through the back door, the one I'd conveniently left unlocked because what kind of trap doesn't have easy access for the people you're trapping? Honey, I think someone's breaking in, Olivia said, right on cue, her voice rising with manufactured panic. Olivia was still in the kitchen when the smoke cleared, pressed against the counter like it might save her. Her perfect hair was a mess. Her designer outfit had ash on it. Her carefully constructed mask had finally cracked wide enough that I could see what was underneath, and it was exactly as ugly as I'd expected. Please, she said, and her voice had dropped the performance. No more concerned wife. No more loving partner. Just raw desperation. Please, we can talk about this. Now you want to talk, I said, checking Victor's pulse to make sure I hadn't accidentally killed him. Still breathing. Good. Dead martyrs are complicated. That's rich. You had 8 years to talk. You chose conspiracy and murder instead. She started crying. Real tears this time, not the manufactured ones she could summon for performances. He forced me, she said, gesturing at Victor's unconscious body. I didn't want to do it. He said he'd hurt Lucas if I didn't go along with it. I actually laughed. Couldn't help it. The audacity of that lie was almost impressive. Try again, I said. I've got recordings, remember? You were the one discussing insurance payouts. You were the one planning timelines. Victor's a lot of things, but he wasn't forcing you to do anything except maybe reconsider your choice in accomplices. She switched tactics. Went from victim to angry. You don't understand. We need that money. The business is failing. We're drowning in debt. So get a second job. File for bankruptcy. Do literally anything except murder your husband for insurance money. It's not that simple. It really is, though. The official report read like a passive-aggressive obituary written by someone who'd gotten bored halfway through and decided to phone it in. Tragic house fire. Heroic wife attempts rescue of husband. Secondary explosion from compromised gas lines. Multiple casualties. Contractors injured in the blast. Victor and his goons, who'd allegedly been doing emergency repairs when everything went sideways. Nobody asked too many questions, which was a testament to either Aaron's ability to manage paperwork or the universe's general apathy toward details when the narrative made sense. Probably both. The fire department found what was left of Olivia in the basement, near where the initial explosion had originated. Dental records confirmed identity. Closed casket funeral. Very sad. Much tragedy. The insurance company paid out without argument because everything looked appropriately accidental and there was no evidence of foul play that they could find. Victor survived, technically. Third-degree burns, broken ribs, a concussion that probably knocked some sense into him, or at least knocked out his memory of exactly what had happened. His two goons were less lucky. One dead, one in a coma that the doctors said was unlikely to improve. Victor took the hint and disappeared back into whatever shadow industry he'd crawled out of. Smart man. Late learner, but smart enough to know when he'd lost. Detective Aaron closed the files with the casual cruelty of someone who understands that paperwork can hide truth just as easily as it can reveal it.